Hi everyone, I'm Luke Hector and this is The Broken Meeple, a show where I devote my time to raving and ranting about board games, but usually more the ranting part. We got a speed review today of, shock horror, a train game. Yes, a train game. Yeah, people know my history with train games. Not a fan of trains, not a fan of the theme of trains, and certainly not a fan of any of the heavy train games like Age of Steam and 18XX and Imperial Steam and all those train games, Brass and a few others, they can all go to hell. Like, I'm not a fan of those games. But these ones, light ones, Ticket of Ride, Spike, some pick up and deliver ones that are a bit on the lighter side, Isle of Trains from last year. Those ones I can still play, but yeah, I don't particularly care about trains as a theme. So yeah, jumping into something like this with a train theme is not exactly something you would expect me to do, but light pick up and deliver games aren't as common these days as they used to be. They were a bit more popular, say, about a decade ago. I got one in my collection called Spike, which is probably the last one I saw that was like, half decent to keep. And even then, that one's probably due for the coal pile at some point soon. So Station to Station is basically meant to be another lightweight pick up and deliver game that is themed around trains. So it's like, okay, fair enough. Maybe this one could be one that could replace Spike and be something a little bit different. So I'm just going to jump into this one speed review style and see if it meets the cut. Station to Station is of course a game about collecting victory points, and it's got two aspects to it, pick up and deliver as well as the route connection aspect. You have one train on the board that you will basically move around the board, visiting different cities which have different tiles, some of which give you immediate effects, some of which upgrade your train, and some of which are the orders in which you have to deliver the goods in order to get the reward. But in terms of the turn sequence, you first have the option to buy from the market. The market gives you pairs of resources, it gives you the cost, but if your city does not produce it, it costs extra coal in order to actually import them. Coal is basically black cubes, and it also enables you to move around the board quicker. Speaking of moving, the next bit is to travel, and then here you get one movement for free following the tracks, but then you can spend additional coal to move faster. And then once you get to the tile, you essentially resolve the tile for the immediate bonus or deliver the goods, etc. But the little quirk is that if you were to move on to a space with another player, because you can't finish your turn on another player, you effectively get to have the travel phase again, like you repeat it. So you can kind of use a mixture of coal and other players to leapfrog a little bit across the board and do fast travel whenever you need it. While you're doing this, you're attempting to connect to various cities. Each of your route connection cards have 2 cities. You've got to visit both, and once you do it, you get points and some money. That's essentially the main gist of it. But in terms of the cargo, when you buy goods, they come in these little sort of tiles of oil, wood, and grain and stuff like that. And these go on top of your board, which is represented by this little ticket board. You put them across the top, and basically you can have up to 8 cargo in your train. But you can also grab these other rail cards that enable you to utilize these to get discounts on fulfilling orders, so you don't need as much cargo. You then have a little bit where you can, alternatively do some work, which basically just gets you some money or coal if you're in dire straits. Basically the I messed up move. You don't really want to do that. But then afterwards you get to hire crew, and so the crew cards come in 2 different levels, level 1 and level 2, and each one of them has a special ability. The level 1s basically are when you do X get Y, or you may convert X to Y once a turn, and the level 2s are basically ways of scoring points. So for example, these ones I've got here, every time, once a turn I can trade in a steel for 2 points. Every time I fulfill an order, once a turn I can get a coal and a victory point. These are in addition to the rewards you already get, and these, this is only a small pile here, there's quite a decent amount of them. But how do you actually get these crew? Well, you have to spend tickets. Where do you get them from? You get them from all the pick up and deliver stuff you're doing. So every time you complete an order tile, it goes face up down on your board as a ticket, and depending on which region you got it from, you have to put it on the corresponding region. The card costs for different crew basically depend on which region one you're going for. So if I want the crew card that's here, then I can either spend 2 generic tickets, or I can spend a West region ticket. So if you get the correct region for the card that you want, it costs you less, but basically you can only have so many on your board. And That's basically a typical term, but the rounds are 3 seasons. So as we go through the first round, everything's laid out and it's spring or summer, I think it's summer seasons. And then once the bag runs out, where you basically replenish every turn, you then replace it with a bunch of autumn tiles. Some of these will flip over to be more powerful, the rest will come out of here. You'll do the exact same thing for winter, but then at winter there is a countdown mechanic for whistle tiles that when they come out, as soon as a certain number of them have come out, game ends, that's it, total up the points. And there's very little endgame scoring, so you are, apart from the crew cards, you're pretty much dictated on what you scored during the game. So first up, for a game that is not that expensive to grab, this is a pretty well-produced game from Alley Cat Games. I mean, these are very thick tiles. These definitely feel quite chunky and very good production. You've got wooden trains, you've got, decent card stock for the root cards and the skill cards, they're pretty sturdy. They're small cards, there's no reason to sleeve them, I don't think there's any point. And even the little cargo trains, I mean, they're beautifully illustrated and they sit nicely on the top of your board, and you basically just put them in a conga line, like you're creating, well, God forbid, a train. Really, the only thing that's kind of a bit meh on the production is the coal cubes, and, well, I mean, big deal. I mean, what else are we going to use for coal cubes? So, all in all, from an artwork, a graphic design, and a production standpoint, pretty decent and solid all round. The game quotes 90 minutes for 2 to 4 players. That's quite accurate, actually. I think 90 minutes is about as long as this game should take. If it takes any longer, then you're AP and you're taking too long. But yeah, 90 minutes is kind of fair. The game scales for players in terms of how many tiles are in the bag. You probably want to play this with 4 players as often as possible, just so that you don't have to do anything with the starting tiles. You just use everything. Whereas if you use 2 or 3, you've then got to go, well, hang on, I need to take out so many of the spring ones, so many of the autumn ones, so many of the winter ones. How many countdown tiles do I need to use? I don't need to use all 4. It's like, that gets a little bit annoying when you do 2 to 3 players, but at least those games will be quicker. 4 players, you've got more turns, more like people acting, so there's a little bit more downtime, but still 90 minutes is about right. In terms of the rule set, this is really simple. I mean, the rule book is probably bigger than it needed to be, but it explains everything pretty well, and it's quite easy to reference specific rules. Really, the main rule that trips a few people up, and you certainly do want to maybe check BGG for exactly how this works, is how the rail cards work from a discount perspective, because in the first game we played, we actually got these wrong as to how they worked. But technically, it's just a case that for each one of these you can discount one thing on the order that you're doing. The way you read the rules can sometimes make you think you're only allowed to use one of these on an order and that's it. Like the rest of your rail cards are kind of redundant. But the idea is basically each one can count for one thing. But obviously, if you spend a lot of time grabbing these for discounts, you're not getting a lot of the orders done in the first place, so you do have to kind of micro-balance that, which is a cool little thing. But the rest of the rules, though, very clear. And I gotta give props to the setup reference guide on the back. The quick reference for how you do each of the 5 actions, which is kind of partially laid out on your board anyway. Very clear to read. Easy, clear icon reference. An index. Color-coded headings, so if I want to look up market, I've got the color-coded bit there, but then I've also got the color-coded, index number there, and it's like fantastic, a game that actually gives you an index. And then it's also got the setup diagram, which literally I don't need to look at the rulebook to set the game up, because it tells me what I got to do with all the tiles as well as what every player gets, and it's very straightforward. Very good reference guide. But yeah, this is definitely on the lightweight side of things, but that's not to say it's a cakewalk in terms of its complexity, in terms of like the gameplay, because you do have to plan out your routes. You've got the route connections that are worth doing, but then is that going to be your focus, or are you going to try and do some orders as well? You can't really do one or the other on its own. You do need to diversify to some extent, but you kind of look at where the other players are in terms of their trains. You might be able to leapfrog travel across the board for minimal coal, and it's like, oh, okay, maybe that's worth doing rather than this order tile, because I can skyrocket over there and get this route card done. But you do need to micromanage your coal, because the coal enables you to move quicker across the board. Well, do you have a good supply of coal, or are you spending it too much, in which case you need to be careful. If you want particular crew cards, you might have to be purposeful as to which region you do an order tile from, in which case you need to be able to move there, you need to plan out ahead. So there's definitely enough depth in here that you can't just cakewalk through this game. You do need to think, but it's definitely not a particularly brain burny. It's not going to be overcomplicated. Nobody I've played this with has gone, I don't quite understand what I'm doing. It's like that. It's pretty straightforward what you need to do. And then the whole ticket aspect of grabbing the different crew cards is just a nice little bonus to customize your playstyle. Even the tiles themselves change throughout the seasons. I mean, you've got decent bonuses as well as a choice between coal and money or victory points at the start with these orders, but then as you go through autumn and winter, it starts evolving so that it gives you both bonuses and then eventually only gives you VP. So in the early game, you might think, well, I'll just take money and coal. It's kind of what I need to do things. Yeah, but if you get an early leg up with the points, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And you don't score a huge amount in this game. I mean, looping around the board is pretty difficult to do. You're probably going to be somewhere more in the region of like the 80s and 90s if you've done particularly well in the game. And so, every point matters. Sometimes taking 6 points on this tile could be a decent chunk of your final score if you're willing to sacrifice the coal and $10. So you've got a nice amount of decisions to make, a little bit of variety with the crew cards, and not tons of variety. It's not like every game's going to feel completely different. You're all doing essentially orders and route connections. But you've got just that little bit of a tailoring aspect to it, and again, it's not difficult to teach or get to the table or play it. Now, there is a problem with the game, and it is kind of a biggie, although it can be easily fixed. So it depends how willing you are to use a house rule. The countdown tiles that you get in the winter section, you draw so many of them out of the game, and they enable you to basically have a sort of ticking time bomb for, oh, the game's going to end any minute, right, keep going, it's ended. It works in Spike. It works in a lot of other games. I think the variable endgame timer is a fun mechanic. It doesn't work as well here though, and this is why. When you play Spike in games like Earth, and I think Earth finishes equal turns anyway, but when you play other games including Spike, for variable endgame triggers, you tend to have a lot of turns. Forest Shuffle's another example. The card game, you play the winter cards, and when they come out, they trigger the end of the game. But you have so many turns, and the turns are so snappy that you don't really kind of remember how many turns you've had compared to somebody else, and you feel like you've got enough done. Like, would one turn really have changed everything? You're not entirely sure. Here though, you don't have as many turns. Let's take a 4-player game for example. You have 20 tiles already set up on the board. That leaves 16 in the bag. Each of the 2 other seasons has another 16 tiles, and in winter that's including the countdown ones, okay? So that means that if 4 of you are playing and every turn you replenish a tile from the bag, that means that each of you is only getting 4 turns in a season before it moves on to the next season. So, okay, that doesn't leave you with a huge amount of turns in the game. I mean, technically you are only playing about 12 turns in the game. The turns you can get quite a lot done, but yeah, you're not doing a ton here. And the problem with that is, when you get to the end of the game and it ends by a quick, sudden death thing, you frequently have the situation where that one extra turn that you got versus another player matters a lot. The first game I remember playing of this after we got that, rule clarified, the only reason I won the game over a friend of mine was because the countdown timer allowed me to get an extra turn compared to him. So if we had had equal turns, he would have won easily. But because I got the extra turn, I beat him. Is that fair? Is that, do you feel good about a victory like that? I sure as didn't. It felt really hollow. And so I don't think that endgame timer works here, and it kind of kills a lot of the endgame enjoyment. But it can be fixed. If you house rule this game to say that when you draw the last countdown tile, you finish equal turns, it fixes that problem. And I know that's not entirely how they intended this to be, but trust me, I think you're going to want to do it. And if you run out of tiles in the bag, whatever, just shuffle up some of the discarded tiles from earlier and just use them. It's not difficult, and even then, that's only if you draw the countdown tiles really, really late. And I mentioned that you'll get about 4 turns each. It could be less. When you get into winter, it depends how quickly you draw those countdown tiles. We're talking 4 turns. If the countdown tiles come as the last thing, you might get less. So, that extra turn really, really does matter. So, Station to Station is an okay pick up and deliver. I don't think it's quite, one to shout from the mountaintops about. Is it better than Spike? I mean, it's better produced. It's certainly a lot easier to micromanage than Spike is. I think Spike looks a bit dated with its aesthetics, but Spike is pretty straightforward and has some cool elements to it. You are building the route in Spike, whereas here you are just following the map board. So they're kind of on par with each other, really. Spike for me is kind of a 6 out of 10 at this point, and I think Station to Station is kind of similar, maybe slightly better. I would probably say it's kind of on par with 6 out of 7. 6 or 7, I don't really know. The crew cards are cool. I think maybe some of them are a little better than others, but, you know, not to a great unbalanced extent. I do like the, you know, leapfrogging that you can do. There's definitely some forward planning you got to do. I do appreciate how well it's illustrated. I think this does deserve a 7 out of 10. You know, a basic, you know, seal of endorsement, because it does do a lot of things right, but it would definitely be a 6 out of 10 if you played with the original rules with that problematic endgame timer. I think the 7 out of 10 is caveated by the fact you need to put that house rule in, because if I don't play it with that house rule, I will enjoy this game less, because I know that the end game is going to feel very hollow. Scores can be quite tight with the winning players, and that extra turn means everything. But, you know, there's a lot of other stuff that's done well here. Again, it's not anything particularly new. We've seen everything here before. This is just basically another light pick up and deliver train game, which, to be fair, we're kind of short on at the moment. There's not a lot of pick up and deliver games, period, let alone light ones, so this one could fill a nice little niche for families or for light gamers. You know, it could suit a game cafe because it really doesn't take too long to learn the rules in that. So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, then please thumb it up on YouTube and consider subscribing, because your views and engagement help drive this channel forward. Of course, if you want to subscribe to the Patreon as well, I'd really appreciate it, because I've got to pay a lot of fees and subscriptions and everything each year, as well as maintain the equipment. Patreon is how this channel keeps running, because it's not my day job. Of course, let me know your comments on this game. Have you played it? Do you like it? Do you hate it? Is there a different pick up and deliver light train game you could recommend? Doesn't have to be trains. Light pick up and deliver will do. What do you think about that end game timer rule? Do you think I'm wrong on that, or do you think I'm right on that? I'd be interested to know your thoughts on the whole variable end game timer mechanic. Until next time, though, regardless of whether you're willing to house rule this game or not, it's still only a game. So play it how you like and enjoy. Take care.